Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 13th podcast of CIPS MENA Procurement Master Talk Show. I'm your host, Lalit Dhamija. I'm Procurement and Supply Chain Management Trainer and Solution Provider, a Chartered Fellow of Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, popularly known as CIPS. I am a certified project management professional, graduate mechanical engineer with an MBA and a social media enthusiast. Over the past 40 years, I have worked with CEOs and trained thousands of executives, managers, and project leaders in Fortune 500 and multinational companies. I've been working as a CIPS volunteer in UAE since 2009. Today, I'm joined by Siddharth Batra from Jack-up Offshore Platform off the coast of Maldives. Hi, Siddharth.
Hi Lalit, how are you?
I'm fine. So I'm looking forward to an exciting session. We will discuss about Siddharth's ongoing experience of working on the Jack-up platform from the last 110 days of the coast of Maldives related to procurement and project management aspects, a millennial's viewpoint of working remotely and offshore during current pandemic. We will summarize the key learnings at end of the podcast. Siddharth Batra is a Bachelor of Civil Engineering honors from National University of Singapore. He is currently working as a project manager at Fugro and was previously with Heerema Marine Contractors. Siddharth is a millennial project management professional with a successful track record of contribution to several high-profile projects around the globe in the offshore building sector and offshore energy sector across a time span of 8 years. Siddharth is a passionate rock climber and an advanced paddy scuba diver, in addition to being a globally experienced project manager known for working well with stakeholders to deliver results on time and within budget. Siddharth is a regular participant of CIPS MENA events. Sid, the first question to you is, how will your colleagues describe you through three attributes?
Hi Lalit, thank you for the question. So first, I would just like to thank you for that splendid introduction. Couldn't have said it better myself. To answer your first question, the three prominent qualities my colleagues would use. The first quality I would say, they'd call me energetic. I, like a lot of people in my generation, have this constant brain chatter of what's next on the list, what's the next challenge, and that obviously carries over into my workplace behavior as well. And I think the thinking that my colleagues have is, if it's with Sid, he's probably doing something to fix it. So the first quality would be energetic.
Okay.
The next one would be communication. This I've heard time and time again from several of the team leaders that I've been a part of. I have been called a good communicator. So this is especially pertaining to the emails that I write. I've been told that I am especially clear. I use a lot of tables while I communicate. When I give actions to people, they're always clearly marked out. I always follow up with a phone call, and I leave very little room for ambiguity. So the second thing, the second quality that my colleagues might point out would be my communication skills, at least over email. The third one that you might hear would be approachability. I'm very approachable, I believe. I'm very open for questions. I'm open for suggestions, and I'm happy to take suggestions on board, modify my approach, implement suggestions. And working with me in a team with me is, I would say, a democratic way of working, for the lack of a better word.
So you are energetic, communicative, and you are approachable. And I know
That's
when
correct.
I was doing my PMP, we were told that time a project manager should spend at least 90% of time in communication. So, as you are in project management, so I think it is a good quality. And Siddharth, would you like to discuss some of your hobbies with our audience?
Yeah, sure. Um, yeah, so I have quite an interesting list of hobbies. The unfortunate part, of course, of being a millennial in this current workforce, which is all go, 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 is that having finished my education after universities, I tend to use the word used to quite often. So I used to do a lot of rock climbing. I did a lot of mountaineering as well, and that has taken me to some quite adventurous locations and very interesting spots in the world.
Like,
I've done this.
can you describe somewhere did you do your rock climbing?
Sure. So I did a lot of rock climbing in Singapore, Indonesia, did some in Malaysia, out in Canada when I went recently.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, it's a passion of mine. I love the sport because there's a goal that you have to reach towards. It involves a lot of determination. So I like rock climbing and mountaineering a lot. I don't nearly do them as much as I used to, but
Mhm.
still in love with that sport. Um, Apart from that, I have always had an affinity towards water.
Mhm.
So I have been a swimmer. For a very long time, since I was in grade three, I woke up at 4 a.m. to go to swimming lessons, and I continued that through university. I continued that to this date. I swim quite a lot whenever I have the opportunity, be it a beach,
Mhm.
be it a swimming pool in the apartment building. And that naturally led to another very adventurous sport, which is scuba diving.
Mhm.
So back in 2013, I decided that I will take some scuba diving lessons. It was not possible when I was a student because that tends to be an expensive hobby.
Okay.
But I've done about 32 dives now, and I'm an advanced paddy diver. So that's something I'm very keenly interested in.
Wonderful. Which are the places you have done scuba diving?
Oh yeah, so scuba diving, it's an amazing sport. It takes you into an underwater world that I
Mhm.
think we in the 2D land space that we live in have never experienced. I've done scuba diving in again in Indonesia, several areas in Malaysia,
Mhm.
um, here in the Maldives. So quite a lot of places in general.
So, a lot of adventure and visiting exotic places and pursuing your hobbies. Great. And coming to your career, how far you have progressed in your career? I know it is 8 years. And how has been your journey so far?
Yeah. So I graduated from the National University of Singapore in 2013, and I did a bachelor's in engineering,
Mhm.
in civil engineering to be specific, and I specialized in structural engineering in that course.
Okay.
Right after that, I joined a company called Heerema Marine Contractors. Heerema is a Dutch firm, and it's in the upstream energy sector,
Mhm.
and they install oil and gas platforms. They install wind farms. So they're involved in offshore installations like tension leg platforms and FPSOs. Um, so Hiroma is a pretty niche company.
Okay.
where it works. It owns a lot of interesting heavy lift vessels and semi-submersible vessels, which are one of a kind.
Mm-hmm.
You should try and Google them.
Yeah.
I was at Heerema for 4 years. I started out there as a structural engineer, and in that role, I would design and study models behind a desktop. I would um, prepare them on paper, prepare reports.
Mm-hmm.
But Hiroma had an interesting way of doing things, wherein it would not just let you sit behind a desktop all the time. So I had the opportunity to have a lot of offshore experience because Hiroma would force you to watch the implementation of what you had designed.
Okay.
So that was quite an interesting way of working. And that obviously took me to several offshore projects with key clients like Chevron, Shell, etc., in various destinations like Angola, Malaysia, Netherlands, Indonesia, Hong Kong.
Wonderful. Quite exciting. And
Quite exciting indeed.
and then from Heerema, where did you move?
Right. So I spent 4 years in Heerema in Singapore, and right after that, I joined Fugro, which is another Dutch company.
Okay.
Fugro is primarily historically known for ground investigation, and what Fugro actually does it de-risks projects in the energy and infrastructure sectors
Mm-hmm.
by doing subsurface surveys. So I'm currently working as a project manager for Fugro, and I have handled about 10 small to large projects in the last 3 years that I've been with Fugro.
Mm-hmm.
And they have primarily been in ground investigation surveys, where we have provided data which engineers can further use to design structures or provide information to energy companies.
Okay. Uh, I know Fugro used to work quite extensively for ADNOC also when I was there in ADNOC. So Fugro used to do a lot of geo uh, investigations for us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. So Fugro in the Middle East has quite a wide footprint. It has worked for key clients like ADNOC. In fact, one of the large projects that I was involved in, which is very interesting, was with the Red Sea Development Company.
Uh-huh.
It's another up and coming development that your listeners should look at. We Fugro did a lot of ground investigation at a feed stage for the Red Sea Development Company, which has been quite interesting. So Fugro always goes into locations which are um, riskier, where most companies would likely not go in, and that's because we try and maintain a vision of operational excellence.
So this Red Sea project is in Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, if I'm right.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. A
Okay.
very environmentally focused, quite one of a kind development for tourism that's up and coming in the region.
Mhm. Okay, Siddharth, what I've observed, uh, you have been working quite a lot many days on the offshore platform here. During our days, it was 1 month off and 1 month on the off
Yeah,
platforms. And here I have observed from your profile now, you have been working from the last 110 days on Jack-up platform, which is offshore.
yeah, that's correct. Yes, that's
Tell
correct, Lalit.
about
Obviously, but
yeah.
this is an unintended consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic. This was not the base plan by any means.
Mhm.
We've had to, like everybody else around the world, adapt to the implications that COVID-19 and the worldwide lockdowns have brought. So the seafarers actually around the world, with not just us, have been stuck. Um, in fact, I would like to bring to all the notice of all your listeners that 25th June was the day of the seafarer,
Okay.
and there are approximately 1 million people who are still currently stuck at sea, um, because they have been stranded with no way of going home. There are obviously a part apart from that, to compound onto the problems, there are difficulties in accessing ports because ports are jam-packed
Yeah.
and refueling is difficult. Crew changes are impossible because there are no flights.
Mm-hmm.
And something we have to remember is 90%, nearly 90% of all the world's trade is kept in line by the seafarers.
Yes. Yeah.
So, yeah. So
So
the global supply chain, the way it has been impacted because of the pandemic is quite immense.
yeah.
And I think us being offshore as a consequence of that is, yeah, it's one of the unexpected complications that everybody to some extent has been dealing with.
But you have been maintaining supply chain and you have been working throughout and trying to contribute. And I think you are also, in a way, frontline workers who are helping the complete population. So, in a way, we
Absolutely, yeah, yeah.
thank all the workers who are offshore and supporting the populations. Thank you for that. And what will be your typical day on Jack-up platform, Siddharth?
Yeah, I mean, as you cited just previously, it's been now 110 days and running. So I'm quite used to the days on board now. A typical day begins with a daily briefing with my crew. There are about 29 of us
Okay.
on board here right now,
Okay.
um, who have been on board since the 20th of March.
Okay.
A typical day would involve discussing the day's operations with the crew,
All right.
deciding which team is doing what, and what resources will be needed. So planning in advance for that. We
Mm-hmm.
will also bring up safety moments from the days and weeks past and reiterate them, and share it with the crew to make sure that safety is on everybody's minds.
Okay.
Um, After that, we would have a discussion with the marine crew, which involves the captain, the first mate, and chief engineer on
Mm.
any marine operations that need to happen during the day. So that could involve mooring a supply boat to the vessel. It could involve refueling operations that need to take place.
Mm-hmm.
Apart from all of this, which is a very site-specific activity, my role as a project manager obviously involves a lot of regular office work as well.
Mm.
So after I'm done with my daily briefings and preparing the reports that I need to prepare, I get into my office here. I have pretty good stable internet, thankfully, as you can tell right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I get my project manager hat on. I finish up forecasting reports, cost control, cost approvals, procurement and supply chain coordination with the procurement team who's onshore, um, updating the program of the project, scheduling resources, etc. Um, so that's my typical day in general. On a weekly basis, I have a catch-up call with our local agent,
Mm.
and we have to coordinate things like medical and food supplies, because all of these things have to be done well in advance now. So small things which are typically perceived as basic are now quite a project in themselves. For example, arranging supplies is quite a task at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
We have to plan well in advance, um, to make sure that everything comes on time, and we have to clean our supplies, disinfect them, etc.
What do you do for exercising, entertainment, and when you are not doing your office work?
Yeah, good question. I mean, being stuck 110 days, you do not want to be bored. So we had at the beginning planned for this somewhat. We brought in exercise equipment, treadmills, etc., to make sure that everybody gets in a daily dose of exercise.
Mm-hmm.
The galley, which is our gathering area, it also doubles up as a cinema on occasion, and we watch movies there sometimes.
Okay.
Um, yeah,
And it
so
is good you are getting regular internet, so maybe that is keeping you in touch with the rest of the world.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. What I miss most is that I haven't been able to obviously attend any social gatherings with family and friends, but
Uh-huh.
I think that's the same for anybody stuck in the city, even yourself, where a lot of cities have been in lockdown. So I think we share the same.
Yeah, absolutely. Nowadays, socializing is mostly through Zoom meetings or through Google Hangouts, WebEx, or Microsoft Teams. We all are doing that. So surely that is a way we connect with each other. And Siddharth, how has COVID-19 impacted your operations and you personally?
Yeah, that is very good question, because it certainly has. What I've learned most of all from this pandemic is patience.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, I know this is repeated in every project management or every lesson everywhere. It's the ability to be proactive and not reactive.
Okay.
I've seen the impact of that. So I've learned how to do agile project management, um, wherein you would expect that a typical project, such as where I'm working now,
Yeah.
would have a more or less fixed scope, time, and cost. All of these all of these points turn into variables
Mm-hmm.
after the introduction of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And yeah, exactly. And you get a lot of threats and surprisingly some opportunities in each of these cases, because of the changes that the pandemic brings. And your job is, as a project manager in my case, is to mitigate the threats, map them out and mitigate them, and maximize the opportunities, because there are opportunities
Right.
and we have to capture those.
Good. So well
So
said. Yeah. Uh-huh. And
yeah, so
mhm. Yes.
yeah, okay, yeah. So if you don't mind, I will just explain to you a little bit of how I thought about this, which was that I'd split it up into a scope, time, and cost-based
Yeah. Go ahead.
situation.
Mhm.
So if you think about cost for a second, um, the way we had to reimagine our cost model was quite interesting. So we had to react very quickly. We luckily, on this particular project, we're in a situation where we were mobilizing from the UAE
Mhm.
right at the time when countries like the UK were calling for a lockdown, and Italy was in full throes of a lockdown.
Mhm.
And UAE could not at that point anticipate that there would be a lockdown. I couldn't envision it myself, but we had to think ahead. We had to imagine that all of this could happen. And something we did is a lot of upfront actions. So we mobilized with more than necessary spares,
Okay.
and obviously that yeah, and obviously that incurred extra upfront cost, but that forward planning has led to reduced costs down the line. For example, shipment of goods, which is severely impacted right now, has been controlled as much as possible because of the fact that we took more than necessary spares.
Okay.
In fact, I would like to give you an example, if you don't mind, about a particular shipment
Mhm.
that we had ordered from the UK. And we expected, obviously, in a typical situation, you would expect this to arrive to Maldives within days. Unfortunately, the path that this particular shipment took was that it went from the UK to
Mm.
Turkey to
Okay.
the UAE to Hong Kong to
Oh
Singapore,
my God.
got stuck in Singapore for a month, went back to Hong Kong,
Oh
went to the UAE again, went to Sri Lanka, and finally came to the Maldives.
my
And
God.
all of that took more than 2 months.
Imagine.
And it was a very, very, very critical piece of equipment.
Yeah.
Um, Now, luckily, what we had to do was actually incur more costs and place the same order 3 times to make sure that a situation like this is avoided.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
that's how we manage to keep the execution in check. So yeah, while there are increases in cost, there are also opportunities that I believe we took
Mm.
and that we grabbed in order to control.
There's a really
Uh,
interesting story what you told, and I think our other colleagues in other industries have a similar uh, episodes to share. And I'm glad, like you were not impacted adversely by this long time, unexpected long time which that shipment took.
yes, yes, and I mean, while it is unexpected, I think in a situation like a pandemic,
Mhm.
we have to expect the unexpected.
Now,
Um,
yeah, sure. Now we are learning
and
so many new things.
yeah, exactly, exactly, and something we learned as well. Like, just to tell you a little bit about the current project that I'm working on.
Yeah.
We're working to enhance connectivity in the Greater Malay region. The Greater Malay region is composed of 4 islands,
Uh-huh.
and the president's action plan, the president of the Maldives action plan, is to get a bridge constructed to connect 4 islands, which will help improve the opportunities for the Maldivian people to transport between these 4 islands. Currently, this transport is based on ferries that go back and forth, which
Yeah.
are obviously very vulnerable to weather conditions, etc. So a bridge is very necessary. And
Okay.
Mali is a very crowded city with a very, very high population density. So this has potential to completely change the way that the Maldivians currently live their lives. So it's a very strategically important project, and it had to go through. So the timeline on it is still very important, despite the pandemic, and that's not something that our client was willing to sacrifice on.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, at the time when we had anticipated this project, the pandemic was not something to be reckoned with. So
Okay.
what we realized with regards to the scope and the time aspects is that we had to re-envision the way that we handle scopes,
Mm.
wherein in a typical project, um, scopes would simply be handed over to a player like Fugro, and we sit and complete that. In this particular situation, we have to sit together with the client and the engineer and Fugro and re-envision the scope in a way that the client's objectives are still met, while at the same time, no one party suffers too much because of the consequences of the pandemic. So we needed a lot of flexibility from the client and the engineer, which both of them provided. So that's the second lesson for me to learn is that you have to find opportunities in places where you don't think to find opportunities previously.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And you substantiated the point by giving actual examples. And shifting the gears, Siddharth, you have been attending a lot of CIPS MENA events in the UAE. So, what is your opinion about the events, CIPS MENA events, which you have been attending for some time?
I mean, yeah, I really respect SIPS. Obviously, thanks for this opportunity in the first place that I get to share my views with you and
Mm.
your listeners. I've tried to attend SIPS events in Dubai and Abu Dhabi whenever possible. I've followed up on the postings of quite a number of CIPS members like yourself, Siddharth Dhamija as well, and Olga and Sam. My first event, I believe, was the Lightning Talks back in 2017 that were in fact organized by you. It was in Abu Dhabi, and I was very impressed because there was about 20 speakers that you had lined up for that evening,
Mm-hmm.
and all of them brought some very interesting topic to talk about. So it was very insightful for me.
Yeah.
Um, After that, I've also attended quite a lot of millennial events hosted by Sid Dhamija. I enjoyed the one that he hosted Ferrari World Abu Dhabi, and post that, we've also had several outings with CIPS millennials at several venues in Dubai. The networking part is what I like the most.
Mm-hmm.
I've made a number of friends, professionals that I interact with, that I've kept in touch with through these events are still, I've interacted with them overseas, in fact, and the mutual interest, obviously, that we share is something that keeps us in contact.
That's good to know. And what I found from my experience while being associated with CIPS events is this networking part is the best part, where you are in touch with your colleagues, whether they're in UAE or abroad. And again, it is mutual interest and benefit and friendship that continues. Siddharth, what will be your message to the millennials and the young professionals, and how do you see the changing worlds from millennials' perspective?
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Because a lot of things have happened in this year, 2020. It started out with economic sanctions being used as political tools, and then we have had a pandemic, and quite a lot of geopolitical tensions. Now, obviously, what we can draw from that, without getting into specifics, is that times are changing, and what we need to learn is that we need to be very highly adaptable,
Mm-hmm.
and that is true because the way, for example, the oil price has fallen numerous times in the last 5 to 6 years. It tells us that topics of conversation and the industries of the future are going to be different from what they are now.
Yeah.
Okay, so something that I strongly feel is that the way the world is going, and it's now very hard to ignore it, that environment is going to be a very key issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's a field, yeah, it's a field where there is scope for innovation. There's a lot of opportunity for improvement, and I'm quite sure that there are several professions within that field that should soon crop up. And even companies that are currently in this current economic climate, that they have now the option to bow down and change strategy to gear it towards an environmental friendly approach, or basically become uh, part of the history books.
Mm.
And you can see that big companies across the world are in a race to minimize their carbon footprint,
Yeah.
and yeah, and even make historical corrections by going carbon negative, for example, in the case of Microsoft.
Sure.
Um, uh, in the example of Fugro myself, I've noticed that Fugro has become quite sustainable. They have a sustainability manager who reports directly to the CEO. So elevating these positions across the board is it's something that's needed, and it's the way forward of the future, I feel. So that's something that Gen Z needs to look towards,
Mm-hmm.
rather than look toward the old industries. That's a field to watch out for, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing I would say is a lesson, in fact, that we've learned from the coronavirus. Um, Obviously, I personally have not seen that yet since I've been on the board a platform, but worldwide, everybody is working from home,
Yeah.
and if you've seen, Lalit, yourself, that several companies around the world have announced that working from home is either now the way forward, or it's the way that they're going to go. Office spaces are going to be reduced across the board. So I think that will lead to quite a big change. I'm
Yeah.
not sure if we're
Mm.
all prepared for the changes that that's going to bring.
Mhm.
And here, my message to Gen Z is that Gen Z has an advantage. I mean, that's the generation that is skilled at communicating from a screen,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, so my message to them is to capitalize that advantage that they have, but at the same time, not forget the value in person-to-person interactions and the impact that that can have. If I'm to cite an example myself, funnily enough, being on board the boat, I have sort of missed out uh, the social distancing aspects of the lockdown that everybody else experienced.
Mhm.
And I was obviously with 29 of my colleagues, and we were all together, eating together, laughing together, interacting together. So I know all of them very keenly.
Uh-huh.
And what I realized is that uh, everyone's motivations are different. And as a manager, you have to have a little bit of a human factor. You have to interact with people one on one,
Sure.
and you cannot get the best out of them until you do that at a personal level.
Well said.
So I think something that we managed to keep the productivity up in the 110 days that we've been there. A key factor
Uh-huh.
is that everybody works like a key team. So that's something that I think the new generation has to watch out for.
That's wonderful. Good messages, good lesson learned. And Sid, it is a time to wrap up now. You started with your three qualities. You're energetic, communicative, and you are approachable. And you got hobbies of rock climbing. You like swimming and scuba diving. You already completed 32 dives in various exotic destinations around the globe. And then you talked about your career, your
Yeah,
graduation from National University of Singapore, one of the good universities, and your journey while working with the Heerema Marine Contractors. And then in details, you told us about your ongoing journey with Fugro, and about your experiences while working offshore and especially on Jack-up Platform. You described your typical day and what were the challenges and opportunities in these times of pandemic, how you managed to put the team together, and what were the things with the Gen Z who are born into digital have the advantages while we are working from home, and not to forget about person to person interaction. And of course, you also told us about the benefits of networking, especially you were impressed by CIPS MENA events and how the companies have to take care of environment and sustainability, which you also follow in your company, Fugro, in addition to many other global companies who are really bothered about their carbon footprint and so on. Like your interaction with us and with our audience was wonderful, remarkable. They are very useful, insightful, and meaningful things which we have come to know through this interaction. And Siddharth Batra, we really thank you for your time, and especially you are working on the offshore platform, and you could find time for us and share your experience with us. We thank you very much for this time which you have given to us. Thank you,
thank you,
Siddharth.
Lalit, for the opportunity and the time as well for me to express my views.
Thank you. Thank you, audience, for your continued support for CIPS MENA Procurement Master Talk series. This was the 13th podcast in our series, and we look forward to many more which are already lined up. And once again, we thank you for tuning in and for your support and encouragement. Thank you.